Well, the country waits to see how much of the Mar-a-Lago search affidavit could be made public come Thursday. Other documents now publicly sharpen the focus on Donald Trump as a possible subject of a criminal probe. That's what several legal experts are telling CNN. A procedural document unsealed Thursday mentions, quote, willful retention of national defense information, which could point to the role directly of the former president. But even with the legal matters Trump may face, there's also, of course, the political factor. And with me to talk about that, Daniel Lippman, White House reporter for Politico, and also CNN political analyst Laura Barone-Lopez, White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. Guys, thank you for coming in on a Saturday night. Daniel, I want to start with you. There are signs that the former president will try and use the Mar-a-Lago search and his feud with the FBI as a starting point, I guess a continuing point for a potential 2024 campaign. From what you're hearing when you talk to sources, do you expect the timing of that announcement, or an announcement if he does run, which has been a hot-button issue, everyone's talking about it in town, do you expect it to move up, to move back? What are you hearing about that?
What we're hearing is that it's probably going to be moved to after the midterm elections, because if he announces before and then Republicans do horribly in terms of not taking over the Senate, then Republicans could cast blame at Trump and say, hey, you messed it up. You really rallied Democrats in terms of making sure that there's a kind of a rally around Biden effect. Trump is bête noire in the Democratic Party, and so he's going to turn out that activist base. But if he waits longer, then it gives him more breathing room.
Yeah, and Republican leaders have asked him to wait until after, not to make himself the issue. Not that he's ever not the issue. But Laura, that's actually, some of my colleagues had a really good story about how Republicans who are running in tight races, particularly in the House, kind of avoid mentioning Trump altogether as the midterms get closer. One Republican lawmaker telling CNN, quote, I don't say his name ever. If Trump does jump into the 2024 race sooner rather than later, as GOP leaders have asked him not to do, will Republicans have to basically make this all about Trump?
I think that a lot of the races already are a lot about Trump. I mean, especially since we saw that he was a key factor in so many of the primaries and so many of the new candidates, the new Republican candidates who won their primaries, who are now the GOP nominees. One, because they tethered themselves to Trump because they repeated the 2020 election lies. And so we are still going to we've had since he came on the scene, those anonymous quotes was in the CNN article, because again, people who want to distance themselves from him so far are not putting really their names to it, other than the ones that we know already, which is Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger.
Yeah, we're on year 7 of the terror of exactly. Actually going on the record to criticize the former president.
We're going to have to wait a long time.
Yeah, it feels like forever at this point. One of the things, Daniel, you talk about folks that Trump has backed. Obviously, he's been a huge player in all of these primaries. Daniel, here's what Mitch McConnell said in April about the midterms, quote, obviously the atmosphere could not be better. I think it is an overwhelming likelihood the wind will be at our back, and that's obviously very important. I want to share what McConnell said this week.
I think there's probably a greater likelihood the House flips than the Senate. Candidate quality has a lot to do with the outcome.
Now, the first part's just a fact, right? There is a greater likelihood the House flips than the Senate. The candidate quality comment, Mitch McConnell watches his words very closely. He's not loose with what he's saying there. And what he was alluding to, I think, has a lot of truth to some degree. Is he lowering expectations there, or is he just kind of embracing a reality right now for Republican candidates in the Senate?
I think it's a combination of both. He's kind of throwing those Herschel Walkers, Mehmet Oz's under the bus, because these are not candidates that he necessarily wanted. In terms of entertainment and sports stars, those are not the types of people that McConnell likes to surround himself in the Senate. And they're untested, and particularly in Georgia, you look at the ads, the negative ads about, from his ex-wife, accusing him of domestic violence, and in, Pennsylvania, where you have Dr. Oz committing kind of gaffe after gaffe. It wonders who on the campaign is saying, yes, it's a good idea to post videos of him talking about French cuisine platters. That's
crudités.
Yeah, crudités. So that was actually, I got an email from Merriam-Webster saying that was one of the top searched words this week. And so that's probably not a good, when you're going viral for that, probably not doing that well in your campaign.
Well, and it's an interesting issue, right? And it's fascinating because of Trump and McConnell's ability to really kind of come in and dominate who is running and who kind of the party gets behind has been shifted to some degree in this cycle. But the idea that you're getting at there in terms of midterm races, one we've been watching a ton, for a good reason. It's Pennsylvania. It's a clear toss-up state. Republican retiring. Republicans thought they had a chance to hold it. Democrats saw a pickup opportunity. Dr. Mehmet Oz, who Trump endorsed Democrat John Fetterman, the Pennsylvania, in that race. Now, Oz is catching grief for the very campaign video you're talking about, which taught everybody what crudité actually was.
Thought I'd do some grocery shopping. I'm at Wegner's, and my wife wants some vegetables for crudité, right? So here's a broccoli. That's $2. Not a ton of broccoli there. There's some asparagus. That's $4. Yep. And carrots. That's $4 more. That's $10 of vegetables there. And then we need some guacamole. That's $4 more.
Now, Oz was doing the ad to highlight inflation, which every poll you look at right now says it's the number one concern for Americans. Crudité seemed to be the issue that has caused a lot of angst, we'll say, with Fetterman really kind of capitalizing, trolling Oz on everything from saying crudité instead of veggie trade, confusing the name of two well-known supermarkets in Pennsylvania, which is kind of a cardinal sin in Pennsylvania, trying to make the claim that Oz is parachuting into the race from New Jersey. And there's even a report in Rolling Stone that Trump thinks Oz will, quote, bleeping lose without some drastic changes. I think, Dana, one of the questions is right now, you look at the polling that's come out, we're heading into Labor Day, things are really kicking into gear. Is Oz in real trouble right now?
I think that's kind of blindly obvious because, if you look at Pennsylvania, John Fetterman has not been able to campaign for the last few months because he was recovering, from his stroke. And Dr. Oz has been, campaigning a bunch throughout the state, but has not been able to have that real man, everyday touch. He is a TV star. And with Trump's election in 2016, a lot of people who were on TV saying, hey, I want to do that too. Dr. Oz is close to the former president, but this week he also had issues in terms of the number of houses he has, the number of residences. That harkens back to most Americans can say, hey, they have one house, they have maybe a beach house they go to for a timeshare at best. And so that it kind of comes into the Mitt Romney territory of John McCain, where they've gotten in trouble for their wealth.
Can I ask you, Laura, I want to kind of ride off that a little bit to the place that we generally are most days, which is the White House. Not an institution, not a team known for meme wars, not a team known for kind of being at the leading edge on tech. Their digital team's good, but it's not their focus, right, in campaign, and they embrace that to some degree. But Biden's caught a lot of breaks after a pretty difficult year, gotten a lot of wins. So much so that his team is embracing this whole dark Brandon meme, which basically takes an insult used against him by conservatives, a rather crude one, and turns it around on his critics. You see that there. Look it up. It takes a long time to explain the genesis of it. But you also see he's wearing the aviators. He always wears them, but he's wearing them a lot more now. Got a New York Times style section article about this. I think, look, this seems trivial and kind of weird inside the Beltway, but I do think it reflects a feeling in the White House that I've picked up over the course of the last several weeks in terms of a team that was having a tough time and felt like things weren't ever going to break their way. And there's almost a dare I say, swagger about like how they're approaching things right now.
The White House staff they're feeling themselves. I mean, they're pretty happy about what's been happening because, of course, Biden just got one of the biggest wins that he had been pushing for over a year, which was, actually passing some of the things that were in that Build Back Better plan, the climate change, the prescription drug reform, which Democrats have actually been trying to get for some 20-odd years. So those are things that he now gets to say, look, when I was president, we were able to do this in addition to the infrastructure bills. But yes, to your point, Phil, this White House, throughout President Biden, when he was a candidate, throughout his campaign, they always were happy about the fact and prided themselves on the fact that, look, Twitter's not the real world and we don't engage in Twitter. And now they're actually using these viral memes to show, look, we have a pep in our step and we're going on offense. And they are about to really, really hit the gas on, they say that the president is about to finally actually make a lot of, tour trips around the country to push what he's accomplished and to try to get out there ahead of the midterms. So we'll see if they actually do that now, especially since he's coming off of COVID. But this is something that I think, could potentially be good for Democrats. They're starting to embrace the Internet of Things more. You see it with Fetterman, who has really capitalized on that, and the White House is starting to learn a bit.